Dave Smith joins Cenk, I don't know how to say his name. That's fine though. Cenk and Ana Kasparian on the Young Turks. They discuss the Kamala presidency and they kind of just talk about Israel and everything going on in politics. By the way, guys, you're watching Bring the Asteroid. Thanks so much for joining here. Make sure you like today's video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and let's get right into it.
All right, now let's turn to domestic politics. So I know you thought Biden and Trump were a disaster. So now Kamala Harris is in the race. Does that change your mind at all? Are you leaning in one direction or another?
No, they all, as soon as it's like sometimes like the, the corporate media and the Democrats, they'll be up there and I'll just be like, man, these guys deserve to lose. They deserve to lose so much for so many different reasons. And like just the fact that she's Biden's vice president and just how just terrible of a president Joe Biden has been, and particularly the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, if you can call it a war, the assault of Gaza, is enough for me to be like, you deserve to lose. But every time then Donald Trump comes on TV and says something that's just like so terrible that I'm like, oh, I couldn't possibly support that. I mean, his thing the other day about how cops should have full immunity. He didn't even say qualified immunity. He just said full immunity, because I don't know that he knows the difference between the two. But and then I was just listening to his comments today about how Chuck Schumer's basically a Palestinian, and all Jews have to vote for him because he's going to be so much more of a friend to Israel. So no, I can't support that. And Kamala Harris is just like everything I hate about politics. I mean, her, just her track record as a prosecutor, and it's not like she was one of these progressive prosecutors. She was like a Reaganite prosecutor, and so no, for me personally, nothing's changed there. The dynamics of the race have changed a lot.
Right.
Although I will say, I do think Kamala Harris is in the middle of a very astroturfed honeymoon phase. And I still think that she's going to have a very uphill battle winning an election against Donald Trump.
I never thought I would find myself in this position where I would disagree with a libertarian in regard to harsher prosecution, but I live in California, so I'm there. So, when I look at Kamala Harris's, record as a prosecutor, and I'm now currently living through a situation in which we have a district attorney like George Gascon refusing to prosecute even some of the most violent crimes, I think I would take the Kamala Harris prosecutor from the early, the 2010s versus what we're experiencing now. But I'm really,
and this is a position that she'll probably get a lot of heat from her fellow progressives on the left because, as you guys know, Democrats tend to want to allow criminals to walk the streets, but this is a great example of how when things get so bad, it actually can wake up a lot of people. So she's a progressive, but she lives in California where like theft is okay up until a certain dollar amount and the crime is insane because they have Gavin Newsom over there. So things are so bad in California that it turned a progressive Democrat like Ana Kasparian to like the prosecutor that is Kamala Harris. Pretty crazy.
really curious what you think about that issue overall, right? Like right now, California seems to be taking a more libertarian approach when it comes to things like open air drug markets, when it comes to all sorts of crime, including, lowering the penalties from felony to misdemeanor, things like domestic violence, including strangling your partner, that kind of stuff. Like, do you think that's the correct approach, or would you want to moderate that?
No, that's crazy. It's like I'm a big believer in peaceful parenting. Like I don't believe in spanking or hitting your kids, and I'll talk about that sometimes. And then the responses from people who disagree with that will often be like, "Oh, so." So what? You can't instill any values in your kid, and it's like, no, the choice isn't between like hitting your kid or abandoning your kid. Like there's some middle ground there. And so, the kind of what a lot of the progressive prosecutors ran on campaigned on sounded kind of libertarian, and I think there were a lot of fair criticisms they made of the previous generation of prosecutors, like the idea of like throwing people in jail for pot or even dealing pot, you know what I mean? Like is like, and giving these crazy sentences. I mean, there's still people, you know, in your state who are serving life sentences for marijuana, even though someone's got a dispensary open, you know, a few blocks away from where the prison is or whatever. And so essentially, like as a libertarian, my view is that the role of government, if there is a role for government, is the protection of people and property. And so what you had in the kind of Reaganite, Clintonite era, it was this like authoritarian crackdown on essentially non-violent victimless crimes where people were getting crazy drug sentences. And then the progressive prosecutors were like, hey, we don't want to do that. And even things like bail reform or something like that, at least to some degree can make sense. Like, look, it is kind of unfair that like, if you can raise the money, you get out, but if you can't raise the money, you can't get out. That doesn't exactly seem just. But then they took that and went, okay, so also we're not going to prosecute property crimes. We're essentially going to, like as you were getting at with the domestic violence stuff, like quasi decriminalize some violent crimes, give out tickets for shoplifting, and then just allow the public streets to be completely overrun with homeless people and drug users and things like that. And to me, none of that has anything to do with libertarianism or just common sense. I mean, that's just like a recipe to destroy whatever area you live in. So I would like to see, like, I think there should be enforcement against carjackings and shoplifting and things like that. These are not victimless crimes, and those should be illegal. And certainly choking your girlfriend or something like that should be extremely illegal with serious consequences. And I don't believe that homeless people should be allowed to set up encampments on public property. Public property is something that everybody has been forced to contribute to the creation and maintenance of. And so therefore people should have some right of some say over what goes on there. But at the same time, you know, just the only thing I'd push back on you is when you say like, oh, you'd rather go back to that world. I mean, I understand why I probably would feel the same way if I was living in California, but you sure wouldn't feel that way if it was like your kid or your brother or something like this who caught like a 30-year sentence over, you know, something that should just be legal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like that's, so they're both bad options essentially.
Yeah, I agree. I think one option has been more disastrous than the other, and it's what we're currently experiencing in California. However, I totally agree with you that there was common sense criminal justice reform that everyone in this state was in favor of, which is why they voted in favor of a proposition called Prop 47 back in 2014. Everyone was under the impression that it was going to avoid prosecution of people with like a small amount of pot, you know, that kind of stuff. But they kind of did a bait and switch where something voters did not know was going to happen. Again, they took felonies and they lessen them to misdemeanors. And by the way, that also includes things like child sex trafficking. And it makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, and these are the things, these insane liberal policies that are loosening restrictions on these crazy crimes is what is turning people like Ana Kasparian to the correct side of things. But of course, as Dave Smith and her both point out, it's not just Democrats that suck, Republicans too. There's bad things happening on both sides, and realistically, it's the establishment versus we the people. But yeah, that's all we have time for today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.